Hi, my name is Lexi Jong and welcome to my channel. Today we are going to be talking about the Chantecaille Real Bronze in the shade GOA. If you are familiar with my channel, you'll know that I am not somebody who traditionally wore bronzer. It was actually one of my New Year's resolutions to try to incorporate it into my routine on a regular basis and experiment with a bunch of different ones and see if I like it better. In the past, bronzers have typically appeared very dirty or muddy on me, or they just look completely unnatural. I am not somebody who tans. When I go out, if I get any sun, I turn pink or red. So bronzer for me is not something that always looks natural. So finding a bronzer that adds a little warmth without going overboard hasn't always been an easy task, but it has been one that I've been enjoying playing around with these last few months. Without further ado, let's go ahead and take a look at the Chantecaille Real Bronze in the shade GOA. The Real Bronze comes in two colors, Serena and GOA. Serena is a golden bronze with a lot more golden yellow tones to it, and the GOA is described as a cocoa bronze. And you can see that it is much more of a chocolate brown. And for this reason, I mean, look how dark this is. It has been very intimidating. I never would have attempted to purchase this if it wasn't for so many people telling me how natural GOA really looks on the skin. Now, the GOA comes packaged in this red compact, and you can see you do have an indent for, your fingers, so you can hold it comfortably. This is plastic, so it's very lightweight. It is 11 grams worth of product, or 0.38 ounces inside, and you do have a mirror on the top half of the compact. I'm just going to take a second to read a little blurb about this from the Chantecaille website. It says, a sophisticated, finely milled gel powder bronzer that gives the face a glow that recreates a real sun-kissed effect with a natural finish. The advanced gel powder formula uses pearl pigment technology to create a soft, aerated texture that kisses the skin with a buildable, beautiful glow, but never looks or feels like makeup. And it is made in Italy. This bronzer retails for $78, and it is part of the permanent line. You can see that the actual bronzer comes with this beautiful kind of like a mandala seashell type design on it. Here is the GOA on my finger, and here's a swatch of it. It is incredibly creamy. And when you blend this out, we'll just feather these ends here. You can see that the undertones of this are still pretty warm. They're still pretty golden. Although these undertones are golden, it's still definitely going to be a lot more of a warm, deeper gold versus a brighter yellow gold. So you can see like hints more of like beige and deep tan and so forth versus a brighter yellow gold. Just a few notes about the texture. The texture of this formula is incredibly smooth and creamy. This is definitely almost like a cream to powder hybrid, but they say it's a gel to powder. I can see that. It's definitely got this like creamy luxe feeling to it, and it's so incredibly smooth. I have a clip here to show you of me applying the bronzer, first in lighter layers, which is how I would typically wear it, and then also I amped it up so you can really see the color. So I will be comparing the newest Gucci bronzer in shade Fair with this bronzer. In order to compare the Real Bronze in GOA from Chantecaille and the Gucci bronzer in Fair, I am going to put the Chantecaille on my right side and the Gucci in Fair on my left side. The colors are completely different. What I want to show you is the effect that I get that is different because of these different shades and undertones. To apply the Chantecaille GOA, I'm using the Chikuhodo F04 brush, and this is an angled cheek brush with a lot of give in these bristles, so it's going to allow for a light application. Just gonna get a little bit on the brush, tap it off, and we're just gonna start here. Here is the GOA. Just gonna make that a little bit deeper so you guys can get just a better idea of the undertones. For the Gucci bronzer in 01, I'm using the same brush, but I did clean it off. And I'm just gonna make that a little bit darker so you can see that a little bit better. So as you can see, the Chantecaille bronzer is a little bit more brown, a little bit more of a golden undertone to it. In comparison, the Gucci definitely has more of that pinkish, reddish undertone, and it gets a little bit more of that true sun-kissed look for fair skin, at least, because I know when I don't really tan, but I get pink, and that pinkness shining through just makes it a little bit more natural, whereas the GOA really warms up my face and adds a lot of warmth and contrast. I have used it more as a contour shade as well, and I think it works really well for contouring. Although this application is definitely dark enough for me in real life, I know on the camera it doesn't always come through as clearly. So we're going to use another brush and apply more of this so you can get a truer understanding of how the shades look. We're gonna start with the Refer 24 brush. This is actually my favorite bronzer brush in general. It's like their P22 brush that so many people love for bronzer, but much smaller. So I like this one. You can see it's a little bit firmer bristles, and I did wipe this off. I know it looks dirty, but I have been using it for bronzer for the last week or so. So I did clean it off though. There's no more residue coming off. We're gonna start off with the Gucci bronzer side. Moving on, I wiped the brush off. We're going into the Chantecaille GOA. So here are the two sides. You can see the GOA can definitely be built up to be a darker shade than the fair shade in the Gucci. And you can also see that the GOA definitely has more brown golden tones to it. I don't have anything else on my face. I have the Chantecaille Future Skin foundation along with the Gucci powder, a setting powder, but there's no blush or anything. So these like more golden tones that you're seeing more on the halo outside, there's no highlight or anything that's coming directly from the bronzer. Same thing with this side. I can see like more of some pinkish, a little bit of gold, but mostly like pinkish undertones peeking through. I hope that was helpful. Now, before we move into any comparison swatches, let's first go over my thoughts on this bronzer. I am really enjoying this bronzer. I think it is a great bronzer, and I think my favorite thing about this bronzer is how easy it is to apply. If you were watching the video clip, you could see that going in with this brush, this is the Chikuhodo FO brush, I was really able to pick up pigment very easily from the pan. I had no problem picking that up, but yet I could get a really nice light look with this brush, even more easily than I could with the Gucci bronzer, which is lighter in shade in the pan. So this formula, I think, is just incredibly buildable. It's so easy to apply. It's almost foolproof. With many of the bronzers that I have tried recently, with the exception of the Charlotte Tilbury, which I have in fair and is incredibly light, all of those other bronzers, for me to go in with a light hand, I still have to be cautious to make sure that the brush is just lightly touching my face so that I don't overdo the application or I end up having to kind of buff it out a little bit. But with the GOA bronzer, when I use a lighter brush, I am able to get that light application without having to be overly cautious. And then it's really more about how many times I go over it. I can build it up super easily and get something very dark or medium or whatever. So I think the ease of the application is my favorite feature characteristic of this particular bronzer. As for the undertones of this bronzer, I was pleasantly surprised. I really like these cocoa undertones to it, and there's still a little warmth to it. You still have some golden beige undertones in the actual bronzer, so you're definitely getting warmth, but it's a little bit different than some of the other bronzers that I have that are a lot more yellow. I think with this bronzer, it's really easy to get that tanned look, and the tan is more of an established tan where your skin darkens over time and you have this nice brown color to it versus a golden shade that you might get more with like fake self tanners and things like that. Because although I personally don't tan, my children do, my husband does, and their skin gets brown. They don't really get golden looking. So I think for a lot of other people who tan, it's a little bit more natural to go more cocoa versus more golden in a lot of situations. For me personally, since I don't tan, I really like having the opportunity to kind of give myself that tan look in certain situations. However, I think for me, a lot of the times that I've been playing around with this for a week or two now, and I think this shade actually works really well for me more in the contour area as well. So with bronzer, sometimes I like to apply it higher up, more where the sun would naturally hit your cheeks, or even all the way out like as a blush. But with this particular shade, I really like to put it more right under my cheekbone, where you would traditionally apply a contour shade. And I think it just gives a little warmth and depth to my skin. And I do also like to really concentrate it right here at the back part of my cheekbone. So that is my preferred application with this shade, which differs from the Gucci bronzer. So let's go ahead and get started with some comparisons. The Gucci bronzer in Fair is my other most recently acquired bronzer, and you can see that this shade is much lighter than the GOA. Here they are side by side. And another thing that you know about this Gucci shade is that it's a lot pinker. There are pinker reddish undertones in this bronzer. So here is the shade Fair. I'm just gonna go a little bit lower here, and you can see that it's definitely gonna be a lot lighter. And you still have a little bit of a golden undertone to it, but really your primary undertone is going to have more of a touch of pink. And this bronzer on my skin, I think works really well higher up on my face versus the contour, because it really does give me that sun-kissed look. And what I mean by that is if I were to naturally tan, I would have that hint of pink peeking through my skin. And that's what this bronzer, the Gucci bronzer, does for me. So I think this one works much higher up, and I like to use this one as blush. Another thing to know about the Gucci formula versus the Chantecaille formula, the Chantecaille formula is creamier. This definitely feels like a gel to powder, cream to powder type formula compared to the Gucci, which is just a really smooth, finely milled powder. I like both of the formulas. They both apply very, very nicely on the skin. They're both very easy to work with and to blend out. However, as I mentioned before, when you are applying the GOA, it's easier to get a lighter application versus the Gucci. And I think a lot of that has to do with the formulation. The gel to powder hybrid, I think it's a little bit easier to lay down a lighter layer versus this Gucci bronzer, where you're essentially getting a light layer of this shade, but you have to be a little bit more cautious creating that light layer. And I think a lot of that has to do with how the actual product clings to the brushes. So I think when you're using a light hand to apply the Chantecaille bronzer, you have more particles that are still clinging to it. So if you go back and forth, you're releasing more of those particles from the brush hairs versus the Gucci powder. And I think because it's more of a powder, it's a little bit of a drier formula that releases from the bristles a little bit faster. So you're getting a heavier coat even when you're being light. That's not to say you can't get a light coat with it. I'm just saying you have to be more cautious. Other bronzers, I have the Tom Ford in Terra, and this is their most recent formula of this because I just bought this recently. And I'm trying not to give you guys the finger, but it is this one here. And let's go ahead and swatch that here. So I really like the shade of the Terra. I think it is a really nice light tan shade, and it's kind of in between the two of these, but a little bit closer to the Gucci. It's definitely going to be a lot more golden than the Gucci and Fair, and it has a little bit of a hint of those cocoa undertones that the GOA has, but not that much. So it's still very, very different. If you look really closely, having the Terra next to the Gucci and then the GOA on the other side, I feel like you can really see how reddish or pinkish the Gucci is in the middle here. We're gonna take a look at the Tom Ford. This is the new Shade and Illuminate Face and Eye Palette in Intensity 3, Moss Agate. And this is actually a contour shade. It's not a bronzer shade. But I just wanna show you how this compares to the GOA and why I say that I like to use it more as a contour. Now, this Tom Ford shade is too deep for me. I have to be so incredibly cautious that's not worth it. So I don't like to use it on my face. I really like it as an eyeshadow. But you can see if you look at these tones, how the GOA is much more similar to a contour shade than some of these other bronzers that are more reddish or golden. And that's what makes this a very versatile shade. I think it has enough red in there or enough golden undertones in there that it's a bronzer, but it's also brown enough or cool toned enough that you can use it as a contour shade. This is also a contour. This is the Westman Atelier shade in Biscuit. I'm going to put this down here. And if we just smudge this out a bit. Okay, so there you go. You can see this one also is pretty neutral brown. You can see how much more red the Terra and the Gucci are in comparison with this contour shade. However, it is still going to be a lot lighter than the GOA until you kind of buff it out. You can see that they can both buff out to very similar shades. The difference between the GOA and the Biscuit when you buff them out is that the GOA still has a little bit more warmth to it. It's a little bit more golden compared to the Biscuit, which is definitely going to be a little bit cooler tone, like a traditional contour shade. And the last bronzer I have is the Charlotte Tilbury. This is shade number 1 in Fair, and I think I'll be using this bronzer a lot more during the cooler months to add just a little bit of warmth without looking like I have anything on there. But right now when it's so hot, I haven't been using this one quite as much recently. But you can see this is really more like a deeper tan face shade. It's a lot more yellow compared to any of these others. Let's just make that a little darker. So for me, during the cooler months, I think this is going to be a great bronzer because it's going to add just a little bit of warmth without going overboard, and I won't have to worry about, application or anything. But it really doesn't compare to any of these others. So one more time from the top, we have the Tom Ford Shade and Illuminate Contour Shade from the Moss Agate palette. This here is the Chantecaille GOA. Here we have the Gucci bronzer in Fair, which is 01. This is the Tom Ford Terra bronzer. This is Westman Atelier in Biscuit. And here we have Charlotte Tilbury in Fair. One more bronzer that I have a sample of, I forgot to swatch this. This is the Chantecaille Gel Bronzer. And I'll have to put the name up, what it's called, but I'm gonna actually swatch this one right here in between the Gucci and the Chantecaille so you can see. This is a liquid bronzer and can really blend this out. I've played with this quite a bit, but I just can't really get it so that I like it. But you can see this bronzer is gonna be a lot more red, more orangey toned than the GOA. And I think personally, if I were to choose between the two of these, I personally prefer the GOA. After going through all of those swatches, let's go into my thoughts on what my preferences are. Right now, I have 3 favorite products that I use for contour or bronzing. And I'm kind of grouping these together because I don't typically like to bronze and contour at the same time. It's not to say I never do it, but I typically don't. So for straight up contour, my favorite right now is the Westman Atelier Contour Stick in Biscuit. I think it is fantastic, so easy to use. For a super natural application of it, I like to put it on underneath foundation and just get a little hint of it peeking through. But if I'm looking for a little bit more contouring, putting it above really works. I also have been really enjoying the Chantecaille bronzer in GOA. And as I mentioned before, my favorite placement for that is actually going to be right here at the back of my upper cheekbone and kind of bringing it down here. So I kind of like more of this elongated C kind of shape here. And I think it adds a lot of depth and dimension, and it's sort of like a bronzing in that way because I'm not really in the traditional bronzer spot or the traditional contour spot, but I feel like it looks really natural. And again, that's not the placement I have right now, but that is what I have traditionally been enjoying, and I will show that to you guys in an upcoming video, so stay tuned. And then my third favorite is the newest Gucci bronzer in Fair. And honestly, my favorite way to use that is actually up on my cheeks. I have been really enjoying that on my cheeks as a blush. I do also like to use it more as a traditional bronzer at times, but I think the beauty of it really shines through if I extend it out a bit further and I keep it up here in a traditional blush application. One of the things I like to do with that one is also take a bright pop of color for a blush and kind of put that on the apples and blend it back into it. So the majority of it is the bronzer with just a touch of a brighter color up at the front. If I had to pick just one of these bronzers, the Gucci bronzer or the Chantecaille and GOA, I wouldn't really be able to do that. I feel like the difference in colors and how I like to apply them is a great justification for having both of them. So I think it kind of comes down to what you are looking for in a bronzer. I personally feel like the Chantecaille bronzer in GOA has I actually like the formula a little bit better than I like the Gucci. I love that creamy feeling from that gel powder hybrid. So I really like that. And for me, I can use it more as a contour and a bronzer up here on the cheekbone and obviously the forehead and other places you would traditionally bronze. But I like to keep it further back than I would with the Gucci. So I feel like that gives a slightly different look and purpose to it. So although the GOA can double as a contour and a bronzer, I feel like the Gucci can double very easily more as a blush and a bronzer. And it gives me that really natural sun-kissed look because it does have those pink undertones that kind of give it that look like you're in the sun currently. You're getting a hint of pink from the sun. You're not actually burnt, but you're starting to get there. And I think that's very natural and works great, especially for the summertime. So I think probably during the warmer months, the Gucci with the pinker undertones is going to look a lot more natural to me versus later on in the cooler months when the sun isn't really as strong. Perhaps the GOA will look a little bit more natural because it's going to have more of that established tan look versus a currently in the sun kind of look. Another plus for the Chantecaille bronzer in GOA is that it is definitely part of the permanent collection. If you pan this and you want to purchase another, you are definitely going to be able to find it. It's not going anywhere. However, the Gucci bronzer, I have no idea whether it's permanent or a limited edition. The packaging is definitely designed for refills, and the packaging has even been described by Gucci as a refillable package. However, any word on refills coming out, I haven't seen anything, and I haven't been able to get any response from Gucci either through emails or through Instagram DMs as to whether or not the bronzer is part of the limited edition summer collection or if it is permanent. One thing to note, it does not actually say limited edition on their website, but it has been very hard to find, which makes it pretty confusing. So overall, both of the bronzers have pros and cons, but the Chantecaille bronzer in GOA is definitely one that I have been reaching for a lot, and I think it's going to be one that is very wearable throughout the whole year. And I'm very happy I have it. I think the formula on this is fantastic. I really like how easy it is to apply and how easy it is to build. And this gel powder texture is just, it's incredible. I like the way it feels and I like the way that it applies. So it is definitely a fantastic bronzer to look into. I hope this video is helpful, and as always, if you have any questions or comments, please leave them down below or DM me on Instagram, and I'm happy to help in any way. So if there is something I didn't cover that you have questions on, please just let me know. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up. Consider subscribing if you haven't already, and I hope you'll tune into my next video. So just a heads up, but I do have a couple of more Chantecaille videos coming up in the next few days. So please watch those before you purchase anything. I'll be going over some of my other new Chantecaille products as well as some Chantecaille favorites. And I hope to see you guys soon. Have a great day. Stay safe and healthy.